Coming up on this week's episode, there's a shortest possible or fastest possible line for racers to follow between the start and the finish. And so integrity is staying as close as we humanly can to that fast or most direct line. Hello and welcome to the Transformation Podcast with Metamorphic. My name is Jordan and I'll be your host as we interview team members and special guests to be inspired and empowered to bring transformation wherever we are. You can head to our website metamorphic.global for more resources and opportunities to bring transformation around the world. Welcome to the Metamorphic Zone, where we laugh at the impossible and then do it. Hello and welcome to the Transformation Podcast with Metamorphic. Today I'm back with Brett and we're going to be talking about integrity and how a life of integrity leads to transformation. So Brett, to begin, what is integrity and why is it important in our world?
Yeah, so integrity is kind of a buzzword that lots of people throw around today, but I think it's a very misconstrued word, as in I don't think we understand the full lengths of what integrity is. So the way I describe integrity is there's kind of two levels. The first level is that we are what we are on the outside, the same as what we are on the inside. So essentially we're whole, we're not divided within ourselves. And the more deep or more meaningful, I suppose, definition that I would go with is that we make decisions to act according to our God-given purpose. And so by that, I'll use an analogy of a horse race or any kind of race really that has a start and a finish line. Probably picture that it's an off-road race, because life is not as smooth as a bitumen or highway road. So if there is a start and there's a finish, as we know that there's a shortest possible or fastest possible line for racers to follow between the start and the finish. And so integrity is staying as close as we humanly can to that fast or most direct line. So even through the weaving, through the trees, through the forest, through hopefully not through the lakes, but through whatever life throws at us, we stay as close to our God-given purpose and to our convictions as possible. So if we put those three things together, the first part is knowing our purpose, our God-given purpose. The second thing is making decisions. And then the third part is actually acting toward our God-given purpose. And so integrity, if we follow that threefold step, is making sure that the actions align with our convictions or what we hold strongly to within ourselves. And those hold strongly or have almost a direct correlation to our God-given purpose as well. And so how that helps us, or why that's important in life, is because by definition, integrous means whole. So if we take the opposite of that, if we're divided, if we're fractioned within ourselves, then it's very difficult to have direction, very difficult to have purpose, very difficult to strive for excellence in whatever we do, simply because we're not wholly committed to whatever it is. So as an example, maybe you just think of any decision that you have made once upon a time. You were really passionate, engaged about it. Maybe it was engaging in your relationship, a new job or whatever. And 6 months down the track, 2 years, 3 years, you start to wonder where that passion went. And it's often because we weren't actually fully sold on why it was that we wanted that job. This isn't always the case. There are many examples that we could have of people choosing a job that they love, that they pretty much throw their whole life into. But just as an example, where we're not fully committed within ourselves, where we rely on our emotions or we react to our emotions, often that tends to lead away from a life of integrity, away from that direct line, and toward chaos, anxiety, depression, which are all kind of, for me, symptomatic of a lack of integrity, a lack of direction, a lack of purpose, because we don't know our purpose. And because we don't know our purpose, we don't know which way to head, which leaves us into a state of flux, which then brings about anxiety because we're out of control. We don't know what to do. We're out of our depth, and it's a self-perpetuating cycle. So I hope that answers why it is important for us to have integrity, because by answering in the negative what it's like when we don't have integrity, it then helps us to see why we do need it.
Yeah, it's a really good picture, that straight line. Easy to remember and makes a lot of sense. So can you share with me one time in your life where integrity had a big impact on your life?
Probably the one that comes to mind would be, ironically, when I started at Metamorphic. So I had some other smaller ones leading up to it when I was growing up, but a really noticeable one in my life was I started with Metamorphic as an intern, and when I was at university studying business. And toward the end of that internship, I think it was in the new year maybe, I was talking with Lindsay about the possibility of working with Metamorphic in a more full-time or more full-on capacity than as an intern. And at the same time, I was offered a job to be a sales representative for a different company. I'm not a salesman by, I didn't study sales in business, but it was just an opportunity that was put before me. And during that process, I was wrestling so hard within myself between, if we go back to the definition, the God-given purpose, the making decisions to act according to that, and wrestling within that. I didn't have the same terminology as what I'm using now, but the wrestling that I had to do between taking a potentially higher paying job at the compromise of what I really felt. I loved Metamorphic, still do. I love what we do. I love the church. I love the calling, I suppose, to the position at Metamorphic. But the tension that I had was to go away from that calling and not listen to what I believe was that voice of God at that time. Anyway, throughout the process, what ended up happening is I went to the interview for the other job. The whole time I was on the phone with Lindsay, not literally the whole time on the phone, but throughout I was chatting with Lindsay about what it would look like, etc., etc. Went for the interview and thought it went okay. And when I got back home, I called Linz and I said, look, I'd like to go with Metamorphic. And I hadn't heard either way about the interview with the other place. And that, it just came with a real sense of peace. And it turns out I didn't get offered the other job. And for me, that was just a real confirmation for me that I had made the right decision, because I didn't wait for that and then come back to Metamorphic was my second best. I had made the decision before and was aligning with what I felt really strongly about within myself. So that's probably the most striking example that I can think of.
So speaking of Metamorphic, how have you seen integrity in action at Metamorphic?
Yeah, for me, any organization that is true and lasting, that was birthed out of something really real, is an integrous organization. And so for me, knowing the story behind Metamorphic, how it was birthed, how Lindsay, I suppose, how it all came about in his life, the vision, the mission, the goal of Metamorphic in itself is a story of true integrity. And I'm sure people can go back and listen to our initial podcast with Linz to find out about more of that. But there's a story about a church planter, Pastor Kun, that I'm sure, again, that we've heard of on this podcast. But for me, he is the epitome of the real definition of integrity, because he was living at a level that he thought he was comfortable with. And he didn't realize the call that God had for him. He was living at a level, he had a church of 50. He was always going to be a church of 50. And when he came through the Metamorphic program, his eyes were opened to the possibility of the grander call, the grander purpose that God had for his life. And he wasn't arrogant enough to say, no, I'm still going to be a pastor of 50. I'm not looking to grow. I love the Metamorphic program, but this is what it is. He heard the God word over his life, which is, you have more potential. What you're doing is fantastic. Having a church of 50 is fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have a higher calling. And he stepped into that. And as we know, he's one of the Metamorphic heroes. He's planted hundreds of churches. He's well respected in his village in Cambodia. And for me, that he has made a conscious decision to act according to the call that God had upon him. And it's not always easy. It wasn't something that he just heard and he said, oh, that's really fantastic, I'm sure. It was a thoughtful and a very intentional process that he stepped through to be obedient in stepping out after hearing from God.
We've definitely touched on this already, but do you have any thoughts to add about how integrity leads to transformation?
How it leads to transformation is that we're no longer at war within ourselves. And how, you may be asking how that's transformational, but if you go back and you ask yourself, well, what's life like when we're just meandering through life, that we're going aimlessly from one job to the next, from one shiny purpose, small p purpose, to the next purpose. It doesn't take us very long, or sometimes it does. It sometimes takes us to hit ground zero before our eyes are open. We need to hit rock bottom. But oftentimes it doesn't take us long for us within the deepest part of ourselves to know that we're not fulfilled and we're not living a purposeful life. And so integrity, how it brings transformation, is it helps us to live a fulfilled and purposeful life by, again, going back to the truest definition of integrity, is knowing that we're not just here meandering through this life, that there is a God, he loves us, he has a purpose for us. And our responsibility out of that knowledge is to decide, to partner with God, to plug in and say, Lord, I'm on this road, let's do this, I'm keen. Forgive me, give me your grace when I stumble, but I'm going to live my life as hard as I can, as well as I can, to the utmost excellence, and trying to act according to the purpose that you have. And that is why it's transformational, because we're no longer meandering, we're no longer aimless, we have a purpose. We're no longer where we once had anxiety because we're feeling over our head with the number of opportunities. The number of opportunities now gets narrowed down because, here what I am saying, God is a God of opportunities, of abundance. So it's not that God reduces the number of opportunities. They're always there. But what God does and what integrity does is it helps us to choose the ones that we get the most value for the kingdom of God. It helps us to get most value out of a fulfilling life and a purposeful life for us. And out of that, my goodness, I think a generation like that would be unstoppable.
Yeah. I just want to hear from your heart now. Why is integrity so important to you? Where's the personal connection here?
Yeah, so for me, I suppose, having moved around a lot I was born in Zimbabwe, moved to Australia, having moved around a lot, integrity is essential to me because it's deep. It's not involved in people's perceptions of you. It's I am who I am. And when we have integrity, we're not apologetic for who we are, except where we are wrong and we should rightfully apologize and turn. But in the most deepest sense, knowing who we are in God, knowing the purpose that he has for us, it's been, I suppose, my anchor through everything. I link it, I'd say, to my identity in God. So an example of that is when I went to a school here in Australia in grade 5. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, and I had some shoes which I hadn't yet worn to the sole, as my mom and dad used to want us to get the most value out of the shoes. And these shoes, the school that I was going to previously was more of a private school, and you wore the kind of shiny, glossy shoes. and I transitioned to a public school. We just recently moved towns again, and I was wearing these shiny shoes, and everyone else is wearing black sneakers or dull kind of. It just wasn't very fashionable for you to rock up in your school uniform with these shiny shoes. And I just remember thinking initially, as you are in grade 5, I was taken aback why these shoes were such a big deal to everyone, that I would get teased or, I don't know, made fun of because of my shoes, when no one got to really know who I am. It was all about the shoes and the comments that came because of the shoes. And that for me was, I didn't know it at the time. This is obviously reflective, but that was a one pivotal moment in my life that I just thought, you know what, there's got to be something more that anchors me than the outward perception of what others think of me. And I suppose birthed out of that in understanding, growing in my knowledge of what integrity is. It's not just doing the right thing when nobody's looking. It's so much more than that. It's about going on a trajectory toward fulfilling God's purpose on earth for us. And the truth is, we either fulfill that purpose or we don't fulfill that purpose. And without integrity, I think more often than not, we get to the end of our life and we wonder, where did it all go? What was it all for, kind of thing? And I suppose, I'm a bit of a Batman. That's my bat. I'm a bit fearful. Then I get to the end of my life and it's all been for nothing. And driving me to not do that is, it comes back to integrity for me.
So what's one thing that listeners can do today to start living a life of more integrity?
So I have a saying that who we are shapes how we do what we do. And so the who we are comes back to our identity in Christ, and how we do comes back to our character, and what we do comes back to what we focus on. And so if we can understand that process as a start, let's start with getting our identity right. And there's a whole process that we can extrapolate on. But initially, it comes back to forming our convictions and knowing our purpose. So convictions, if that's new to anyone, it's not an off-the-cuff opinion. It's not something that we hold lightly, something that's just come upon us. It's something that we've wrestled with, that we've tried, that we've looked for alternatives, but we are convinced no more that this is what I believe. And out of that comes a real sturdiness in our character, and then it helps us to focus and pursue the right things. So as a starting point, start to develop your convictions. If you're a very opinionated person, maybe start to challenge your own opinions, and you'll soon realize how divided that you may actually be. But there's lots of resources on metamorphic.global. We've got the resources tab there that you can go to. There's some integrity resources there, which is also a great place to start.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Transformation Podcast with Metamorphic. Make sure to head to our website, metamorphic.global, where you'll find resources to empower you, as well as opportunities through partnership to bring transformation to the world. Follow us on social media. All the links will be down below in the show notes. Thank you for listening.